Archaeology can turn up objects that change history, and sometimes it's just one detail that does it, one detail that's terrifying. I want to talk about 25 finds like that. Finds that genuinely scared the people who dug them up. They make you see the past differently. It can really unsettle the present. There's a device. 2,000 years old, and it's more complex than anything we built for the next 1,000 years. There's a map too, a map that shows continents. Continents the mapmaker shouldn't have known about. So you have to wonder, these discoveries should enlighten us. They should add to what we know, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes they just fill the explorers with this primal fear. That silent question, the one that never gets an answer, that's where the real chill comes from. This fear, it's not about something jumping out at you. It's something deeper, a kind of psychological unease that comes up from the ground. It's like the uncanny valley, but for history. You find something that looks almost familiar, but then there's one detail that's just wrong. A tool, but you can't guess what it was for. A settlement, abandoned with the evening meal still on the table, like everyone just vanished between one breath and the next. Those moments, they force you to confront how strange the past really is, and then, by extension, how fragile our own present is. An archaeologist once said the greatest fear isn't spirits. It's historical silence, a discovery that doesn't whisper answers. It screams a question we don't even know how to ask anymore. That's the backdrop for all these stories. The explorers felt this deep, instinctive disquiet because they were touching the edges of a lost world's logic. They weren't just digging up objects. They were unearthing mysteries, profound ones, ones that challenged the whole timeline of human achievement, ones that hinted at moments of collective experience we can barely comprehend. That quiet, creeping fear of the inexplicable, that's what sets the stage for these 25 finds, the ones that left even seasoned professionals unsettled. We're in a museum in central Mexico, quiet, polished floors, and in the cases dozens of people from the 19th century, preserved, not by any ritual, but by the soil in the crypts there. Dry, full of minerals, they're called the Guanajuato Mummies, and for the early caretakers, the first thing that struck them wasn't decay, it was the expression. Face after face, skin pulled tight, jaws fallen open, this silent, permanent impression of a final scream, a gallery of what looked like torment, a chorus of silent cries. You can understand that reaction. They weren't looking at bones, they were staring into what seemed like a moment of profound distress, frozen. The emotional weight in that room was reported as overwhelming. A palpable sorrow. Many visitors felt like intruders, like they were witnessing a private, endless moment of suffering. Now, modern science has an explanation. Quieter but still fascinating, those expressions are likely natural processes after death. Muscle contraction, how the body was positioned, rapid dehydration of tissue. All of it can pull features into those startling forms, but the power of that first image never really fades. This collection is a reminder. Human remains can communicate across centuries. In a language that bypasses the intellect, speaks directly to emotion. It challenges any clinical detachment, forces us to confront not just history, but the raw, universal experiences. Fear, loss, things time doesn't erase. The real mystery here isn't how they were preserved. It's that unsettling echo, a single, silent moment. We can see it, but we'll never truly hear it. It's a very human fear, that silent echo. It's about emotion, a moment we recognize, but what if the discovery isn't about emotion? What if it's about intellect, something so mechanically precise, so logically advanced, it feels like a message in a language we've forgotten how to speak? That's the second find. In 1901, divers off the coast of a Greek island, Antikythera, found something in a Roman shipwreck, just a lump, corroded bronze and wood, crusted over from 2,000 years under the sea. To the salvage crew, it was a curiosity, maybe a piece of statuary. They boxed it up with other artifacts, sent it to the National Museum in Athens, and for decades it sat there. An odd greenish rock. Then a researcher took a closer look. As the layers of marine growth were removed, something impossible emerged, not a statue. A machine, a clockwork device of breathtaking complexity. Dozens of interlocking bronze gears, some with teeth so fine they looked like they were made by a master watchmaker. But this wasn't from the age of pocket watches. It was from the 1st century before the Common Era. The Antikythera Mechanism, they called it, a hand-powered model of the cosmos. Its dials and pointers could predict solar eclipses, track the cycles of the Olympic Games, model the erratic motions of planets across the sky with stunning accuracy. It was a computer, an analog computer built before the fall of Rome, before the Dark Ages, before 1,000 years of technological stagnation. The men who first understood what they were looking at, they didn't just feel excitement. They felt a profound, creeping dread. One report said they were awed and frightened because this wasn't just a neat invention. It was a ghost, the ghost of a golden age of science we never knew existed. Its very existence whispered a terrifying question. What kind of world built this, and how could all that knowledge, that engineering genius, simply vanish? It wasn't just lost, it was erased so completely that nothing even close to its sophistication would appear again until the great cathedral clocks of the 14th century. This fear isn't about something in the dark, it's about the Dark Ages themselves. The mechanism is a physical warning, a bronze and gear warning about the fragility of knowledge. It tells us civilization isn't a steady climb upward. It can peak, and then it can forget. It can lose its own genius. That lump of bronze scared explorers because it held up a mirror to history, and the reflection showed how easily the light can go out. The Antikythera Mechanism was a fear of lost intellect, but this next discovery is a fear of profound faith, a faith that demanded the ultimate price. There's a deep, natural well in the jungles of the Yucatan, a cenote, at the ancient city of Chichen Itza. This wasn't just a water source, it was a gateway. A portal to the underworld, to Xibalba, and it was dedicated to Chok, the god of rain and lightning. In the early 20th century, an American diplomat and amateur archaeologist, Edward Thompson, got the rights to dredge this sacred well. He and his team lowered buckets and dredges into the dark, still water. They were hoping for artifacts. What they brought up, piece by piece, was a spiritual nightmare. First came the jade, exquisite carvings, then ornaments of gold, worked with incredible skill. But then the dredges brought up something else, human bones. And not just a few, a great many. The sheer volume was staggering. As the operation went on, the true nature of the cenote became clear. This was a site of ritual offering on an immense scale. Research suggests many of the individuals were young, their remains mixed with figurines and precious objects, all cast into the depths as gifts to the gods. For Thompson and his men, working day after day in that heavy, humid air, the psychological weight became unbearable. It wasn't just the physical evidence. It was the atmosphere. The water was dark, impossibly deep, and eerily silent. Every object they retrieved felt charged. It spoke of a belief system where the continuity of life, the arrival of life-giving rain, depended on this most solemn exchange. The explorers were forced to confront a form of devotion utterly alien to them, a world view where the boundary between the spiritual and the physical was thin, and where maintaining cosmic balance required acts of immense gravity. The cenote stopped being an archaeological site. It became a somber monument, a place where hope and desperation met in the dark water. That palpable dread they reported wasn't about ghosts. It was the unsettling recognition of a different kind of truth, a truth where faith could be measured in gold, jade, and the most precious offering of all. It forces a quiet question. What depth of belief, what fear of drought and famine could lead a civilization to such a practice? The well holds its secrets close. Its silent waters continue to disturb because they reflect a part of human nature we seldom see so clearly, the lengths to which we will go to plead with the unknown. That fear of a door closing for good, of knowledge just going silent. You find it in its purest form in a book no one can ever read. Back in 1912, a book dealer named Wilfred Voynich bought this strange volume from a collection in Europe. It was a manuscript about 240 pages, bound in vellum, and from the illustrations, experts could tell it was made in the 15th century. But that's it. That's where the certainty stops, because the Voynich manuscript is written in a script that doesn't match any alphabet we know. The characters are written in this neat, confident hand, arranged into words and paragraphs. It looks like a real language with grammar and syntax, but for over a century now, the best codebreakers in the world, people who cracked wartime codes, they've looked at these pages. And all they see is beautiful, perfect nonsense. And then there are the illustrations. They just make it deeper. There are pages of these bizarre plants with bulbous roots and twisting leaves, plants that don't match any known species. There are astrological charts filled with constellations we don't recognize. There are these intricate diagrams of what look like biological systems, or maybe celestial ones. And then sections with these small, nude female figures, bathing in or connected to a network of strange green tubes. The whole thing feels like a meticulous scientific encyclopedia. But from another reality, and the fear it gives researchers is this quiet, intellectual dread. It's the fear of the uncrackable puzzle. Every logical attack on its code just fails. Statistical analysis shows its word patterns look like a natural language, but the words themselves are ghosts. So is it an encoded book about lost botanical knowledge? Or is it a complex hoax from the Renaissance made to fool a wealthy patron? The craftsmanship is immense. The effort is staggering, especially for a forgery. And that's what really unsettles the people who study it. The manuscript presents itself with utter seriousness. It doesn't look like a madman's scribbles. It looks like a deliberate, careful recording of something. But of what? The Voynich manuscript is a locked door right in the middle of history's library. You can see the door, you can examine the craftsmanship, but the key is gone, and the room inside is dark, and it will be dark forever. It's a permanent reminder. The past can choose not to speak to us. It can just sit there and smile, holding its secrets right out in the open, and that silent defiance, that's its own kind of haunting. They don't make sense in a place like that. In the 1930s, workers for the United Fruit Company were clearing land in Costa Rica, in the Diquis Delta. They were cutting back the jungle to plant bananas. And their machetes hit something hard, something that shouldn't be there. They dug around it, thinking it was a rock, but it wasn't a rock. It was a curve of stone. Perfectly smooth, unnaturally round, they kept clearing. They found another one, and then another. Dozens of them, hundreds, stone spheres. Some were small. Others were huge, over 2 meters tall, weighing tons, perfectly round, made from hard granite. In all that rough, tangled landscape, these things were flawless. For the workers, it wasn't exciting, it was unsettling. The spheres had no clear purpose, no carvings, no markings. They weren't arranged in a pattern. They were just there, silent. They didn't fit anything we knew about the people who lived there before. The skill it took to make them that round with stone tools, it was a kind of artistry, a kind of engineering that didn't match the story. So people started making up stories. Local legends said they were cannonballs from angry gods, or that they were navigation markers from Atlantis, left behind. The fear they caused was quiet. It was about a gap, a hole. These weren't broken statues of gods we knew. They were perfect geometric shapes, artifacts with no context. They were monuments to an intention we can't see, Why would a society do that? Drag these multi-ton stones for miles, peck and grind them into perfect spheres, and then just leave them in the jungle with no explanation. The silence is what gets you. Most old things tell us something. A pot tells you about a meal. A weapon tells you about a fight. A temple tells you about a prayer, but the spheres don't say anything. They just are. That silence challenges the story we tell ourselves about progress. It suggests a culture we know nothing about mastered this abstract perfection. For reasons we'll never know, the past isn't a puzzle where every piece fits. Sometimes the pieces are perfectly round, and they won't tell you what picture they're from. The spheres were a mystery of form, a perfect shape but no clear function. But maybe the discovery isn't about form. Maybe it's about pure function. A piece of ancient technology that seems to leap centuries ahead of its time. In the 1930s, just outside Baghdad, workers were laying railway tracks. They found something strange, a collection of simple objects, a terracotta jar about the size of a fist. Inside it, a copper cylinder sealed at the bottom with asphalt, and inside that cylinder, an iron rod. It was one of several similar finds, all dated to a period between 200 years before the Common Era and 200 years after. To the untrained eye, it was just old pottery and metal, but to a researcher looking at it later, a possibility emerged. This arrangement, this specific combination of materials, looked familiar. It looked like a battery, a primitive galvanic cell. The theory was simple. If you filled that jar with an acidic liquid, something like vinegar or grape juice, the chemical reaction between the iron rod and the copper cylinder through the electrolyte would generate a small electric current. A tiny voltage, a spark from the ancient world. When this was proposed, it sent a jolt through the historical community, the Baghdad Battery. It presented a profound what-if scenario. What if this wasn't a one-off curiosity? What if people in the ancient Near East had a practical understanding of basic electricity? The implications were staggering. For many, deeply unsettling. Early interpreters felt a genuine intellectual fright. This artifact didn't fit. It threatened to tear a hole in the smooth timeline of technological progress. It suggested lost applications, a branch of science that was explored and then forgotten. Imagine the possibilities they might have toyed with: electroplating. To gild a statue with a thin layer of gold using this quiet chemical magic, or a medical application, a tingle used in healing rituals that would have seemed miraculous. Maybe even a religious purpose, creating a mysterious sensation in a temple setting. The fear wasn't about the object itself, it was about the shadow it cast. The battery, if that's what it was, represented a path not taken, a spark of knowledge that failed to ignite a revolution. It forced historians to confront an idea. That innovation isn't inevitable, that a society can hold a fundamental secret of the universe in its hands, a secret that could power cities, and use it only for small, ceremonial wonders. Before letting it slip back into the earth, its power to scare lies in that potential. It is a quiet clay and metal question mark. It asks us how many other sparks have been lost to time, and what our own world might look like if just one of them had caught flame. The battery was hidden in clay, a private spark, but maybe the intention was the opposite. Maybe the message was meant to be seen, just not by us, not by human eyes. That's the riddle in the desert plains of southern Peru. On the ground, it's just barren rock. You see some shallow trenches, lines of displaced pebbles. It looks like random scarring, makes no sense. But in the 1920s and 30s, researchers like Paul Kosok and Maria Reich started studying these markings systematically. And a terrifying truth came into view. They realized the lines weren't meant to be seen from where they stood. They were designed for a viewer in the sky. The Nazca Lines are geoglyphs, massive drawings etched into the desert floor. They removed the dark surface stones to reveal the lighter earth beneath. They depict a hummingbird with a beak longer than a bus, a spider with legs that curve for hundreds of feet, a monkey with a spiraling tail, perfect triangles and trapezoids that stretch for miles. The scale is so vast, the proportions so precise, they only resolve into forms from high above. That's what chilled the early explorers. The people who made these lines, the Nazca culture, thrived from 500 years before the Common Era to 500 years after. They had no balloons, no flying machines, no way to ascend and see their own work. So why invest generations of labor, moving countless tons of stone to create art they could never truly see? The motive had to be beyond human vanity. It pointed to a cosmic audience, the theory's whisper of messages for the gods, etched into the skin of the earth so deities could look down. Or maybe a gigantic astronomical calendar, aligning with solstices and constellations, turning the entire plain into a sacred observatory. For the researchers alone in that silent desert, the psychological impact was profound. The loneliness of the landscape combined with the enormity of the invisible effort, it created a crushing sense of smallness. They were standing on a canvas meant for eyes they could not meet. It was humbling in a frightening way. It suggested a worldview where humanity wasn't the center, but a participant in a larger celestial dialogue. The lines aren't a monument to the people who built them. They're a monument to what those people believed was watching. And that shift in perspective from an earthbound artist to a divine spectator is what makes the Nazca Lines so quietly terrifying. A prayer written in geography, a testament to faith on a scale that literally cannot be comprehended from the ground we walk on. A prayer written in geography. Meant for the sky, but a map is a tool for the earthbound. It's practical. It tells you where you are, where you can go, unless the map itself is the impossible journey. In 1929, in the old Topkapi Palace Library in Istanbul, a curator was cataloging materials. He made a routine find, a map drawn on gazelle skin. It was signed by the Ottoman admiral and cartographer Piri Reis, dated to 1513. At first glance, it was a beautiful artifact. It showed the known world of the early 16th century. The coastlines of Europe and Africa, the newly discovered lands across the Atlantic, but then scholars looked closer and a cold dread began to settle in. The map showed details it shouldn't have known. The eastern bulge of South America was rendered with an accuracy that seemed to leap ahead, but that was just the beginning. At the bottom of the parchment, below the Atlantic, the map depicted a long, ragged landmass. Its shape, to many who studied it later, bore a haunting resemblance to the northern coastline of Antarctica. The continent we call Antarctica, and here was the true terror of the find. Antarctica was not officially sighted until 1820, and its coastline on the map was drawn free of ice. As it would appear only if the land had been mapped thousands of years earlier during a warmer period before the ice cap claimed it. The implications were world-shaking. How did a Turkish admiral in 1513 have knowledge of a continent hidden under miles of ice? In his own notes, Piri Reis was candid. He said he compiled his work from many source maps, including what he called ancient charts from the time of Alexander the Great. That admission is what truly frightened historians. It suggested the map was not an original work, but a copy of a copy of a copy, a surviving fragment from a lost age of exploration, a ghostly echo from a prehistoric civilization with seafaring capabilities we never credited them with. Perhaps a culture that sailed the globe when Antarctica was green. The map scared scholars because it didn't just add a new fact, it erased a fundamental assumption. It pointed to blank pages torn from the book of human history. It whispered of ancient mariners who mapped the world with an accuracy that wouldn't be matched again for centuries. Their names, their ships, their nations, all dust, all forgotten. Only this single, fragile skin remained, a silent scream against the silence of the past. It forces a humbling question. How much have we truly lost, and what other continents of knowledge lie buried, not under ice, but under the sheer weight of forgotten time? They found this stone in a field near Glasgow, 1887. Farm workers uncovered it, a single slab of sandstone more than 10 feet long. They cleared the dirt away. And it wasn't a simple marker, it was covered in carvings, a chaos of symbols cut into the rock over 5,000 years ago. They called it the Cochno Stone. To those workers, the effect was immediate, unsettling. The stone was a dense tapestry, over 90 separate motifs, concentric circles that seemed to ripple. Deep cup marks drilled into the surface, and then the spirals, dozens of them, swirling, interconnected spirals, some coiled inward, others spun outward. Linking and overlapping in a dizzying pattern. It wasn't a scene, it wasn't a picture of animals or people, it was pure, abstract rhythm, etched in stone. The fear it provoked was specific. It was the fear of visual noise, information overload from a source with no key. Standing before it is like holding a radio. Picking up a powerful, clear signal from a distant station, you can hear the urgency in the transmission, the strength of the broadcast, but it's in a language you will never understand. For the discoverers and for archaeologists since, that dense symbolic field felt frantic, like a mind trying desperately to communicate something monumental. But what? The theories are profound, unproven. Perhaps it was a cosmic map, a representation of the heavens, spirals tracing celestial movements, or the journey of souls. Maybe it was a portal stone, its spirals meant to induce trance states for rituals, a physical gateway, or it could be a territorial marker, recording clan lineages in a symbolic code now utterly forgotten. This is what chills the observer. The stone doesn't feel like decoration. It feels like a document, a warning, a prayer, or a set of instructions, rendered in a symbolic language whose last speaker turned to dust millennia ago. We can admire its artistry, measure its grooves, but its meaning is locked away. It stands as a testament to the gap between us and the Neolithic mind. Their worldview, their priorities, their understanding of the universe, all crystallized in this rock, and we can only stare at the code, knowing we will never crack it. The Cochno Stone is a message, and its silence is the loudest part. The Cochno Stone is a message, in a language we don't know, but maybe the message isn't from our ancestors. Maybe it's from before ancestors, before humanity, before anything we'd call life. In South Africa, miners were digging for a mineral, pyrophyllite, and they found something. Inside rock layers, rock that's 2.8 billion years old, they found spheres, small ones, metallic, some just a few centimeters across, but they weren't like anything natural. They were perfectly round, and around their equators there were grooves, fine, precise grooves, like they were machined. For the miners, for the geologists, it started as curiosity. Then it became something else, a kind of dread, because this rock, this Precambrian layer, comes from a time when Earth was a hellscape, toxic atmosphere. The only life was single-celled microbes in the seas. No plants, no animals, no toolmakers, but these objects, their shape was balanced, their composition was odd. And those grooves, 3 parallel lines around the middle, they looked deliberate, manufactured. So the question was simple: who made them? If they're natural, they're a freak event. A 1 in a trillion fluke of crystallization that just happens to look manufactured, with eerie precision. But if they're not natural, the implications change everything. It means an intelligent, technological force was here, billions of years before the first human ancestor. That thought brings a real fear. It doesn't just add a chapter to history. It suggests the book started long before we thought. It makes us rewrite not just human history, but the whole story of life and intelligence on Earth. Where we proceeded, is our civilization just one cycle, in a series of rises and falls going back into deep time? The spheres don't answer, they just sit in their museum cases, whispering one question into the silence: A question that, if answered one way, makes all of human achievement feel like a footnote. A recent footnote in a story we're only starting to read. The spheres whisper about deep time, cycles lost to geology, but sometimes the impossible isn't billions of years old. Sometimes it's right there in a rock formation you can date. In 1936, near London, Texas, a couple was walking a creek bed. They saw a curious piece of stone that had fallen from an outcrop, and sticking out of it was something that shouldn't have been there. The rusted iron head of a hammer with a piece of wooden handle still in the socket. The stone was a concretion, a hard nodule from the Cretaceous layer, which is dated to over 100 million years old. For the finders, the dissonance was instant. It was a simple tool, the kind from any 19th century workshop. Yet it was sealed inside stone that formed when dinosaurs walked the earth. The immediate fear wasn't about the hammer, it was about the foundation of knowledge. Here was an object that seemed to laugh at the entire geological timeline. If this hammer was truly contemporary with the rock, it meant our understanding of deep history wasn't just incomplete. It was wrong. The implications were staggering. It suggested tool-making humans in an era they couldn't exist. Or, more terrifying, it hinted that fossilization, the very method we use to date the past, could work in ways we don't understand. Could a modern tool become encased in ancient-looking stone through some rapid process we've never seen? Geologists have an answer, a calm one. They say the hammer likely fell into a crack in the rock. Over time, mineral-rich water seeped around it, cementing it into a hard concretion that looks like the surrounding stone. The wooden handle's partial petrification adds to the illusion of age. That's the scientific consensus, but the initial shock of the discovery, that first moment of seeing it, bypasses logic. It speaks to a primal doubt. The London hammer is the archetypal out-of-place artifact. It represents the fear that the past is not a settled record, that the ground beneath our feet, the strata we use to tell Earth's story, might be hiding jokes in plain sight. It's a literal wrench thrown into the gears of time, and for a moment it makes you wonder if all the gears are connected wrong. Farmers were digging a well. This was in 1974 near Zion. They hit something hard. It wasn't rock, it was pottery, a shoulder, then a head, then another one. Archaeologists came. They started digging, and the size of it just kept going. It was a huge feeling. This was the tomb of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, and he wasn't guarded by a few statues. It was a whole army, underground, over 8,000 soldiers, life-sized. Every single face was different. Hairstyles, armor, all different. Chariots, horses, officials, musicians, all of it, arranged for battle, facing east in these massive pits. For the people working there, the fear wasn't the figures. It was the intention. This wasn't art. It was a real army for the dead, built at an impossible cost for one idea, that his power would just continue forever. The old texts talk about rivers of mercury, crossbows set to fire, a tomb built like an empire, booby-trapped. In those trenches, with all those faces watching, the air felt strange. It didn't feel like discovery. It felt like walking where you shouldn't, like a parade that never ended. His paranoia was right there, made into clay. Buried, his will felt present, a cold ambition. It outlasted his dynasty by 2,000 years. The Terracotta Army is frightening because it's the perfect picture of what tyranny wants. To stop time, to hold a moment of power, forever, to rule the future. Every soldier's unique face, that's all the individual lives, swallowed by this one project. The silence in the pits is loud. It's the sound of a world, ordered, finished, sealed, by a man who thought he could beat death. Walking among them, you feel that ghost. And you wonder what else is down there, waiting in the dark. That sealed empire, that ghost of power frozen in time. But the discovery wasn't about preserving power. It was about a voice that was never meant to be silenced. In the late 1940s, a young Bedouin shepherd was looking for a lost goat. He was near the cliffs of Qumran by the Dead Sea. He tossed a stone into a cave. He expected to hear rocks skittering. Instead, he heard pottery break. He climbed in. He found tall, narrow jars. Inside them, not treasure. Bundles of old leather and papyrus, blackened with age. What he found would be called the Dead Sea Scrolls. For the archaeologists and scholars who came, the first feeling wasn't joy. It was a profound awe, a trembling awe edged with a sacred fear. These weren't just old documents, they were biblical manuscripts written in Hebrew and Aramaic. From about 200 years before the Common Era to the 1st century, they were over 1,000 years older than any known copies of the Hebrew scriptures. Holding them was like reaching through a crack in time, touching the very hands that wrote sacred history, but that touch was unsettling. Scholars began unrolling and translating. They realized these texts weren't perfect copies of the Bible they knew. They contained variations, different phrasings, entire passages in a slightly altered order. And there were scrolls no one had ever seen, texts of community rules, apocalyptic visions, commentaries about a unique, devout sect living in the desert. The fear that came then was a quiet, intellectual tremor. These fragile, crumbling pages had a dangerous potency. They were a direct, dusty voice from a pivotal era, speaking with an authority that came before centuries of tradition. They didn't just confirm history, they complicated it. They showed the biblical text had a living, fluid history before it became standardized. The foundations of faith, built on the certainty of the transmitted word, now had to account for these ancient variants. For those first explorers in the dry, silent caves, the air felt charged. This was more than an archive. It was a library hidden in a time of upheaval, preserved against oblivion. Handling the scrolls, they weren't just brushing off dust. They were brushing against the raw, unedited thoughts of a people waiting for the end of days. The weight was immense. They held pieces of a puzzle that could rearrange our understanding of religious development. Of Judaism at the dawn of Christianity, the scrolls were a gift and a test of faith in history itself. They taught a humbling lesson, that sometimes the most sacred things we discover are the ones that ask the most difficult questions. The necessary questions. The scrolls gave us a voice from a hidden library, but a voice is something you hear in your mind. A claw is different, it speaks to the gut. It's a physical shock, a visceral one. In 1987, cavers were exploring a labyrinth, the Mount Owen cave system on New Zealand's South Island. Deep in the dark, in a remote chamber with dry, cold air, their lights landed on something. And it stopped them. It wasn't a bone, it was a leg, a complete leg, and it ended in this massive, terrifying claw. Still attached were patches of skin. Desiccated muscle, tendons, all of it preserved. The detail was astonishing. This was the leg and claw of a giant moa, an extinct flightless bird. It stood over 10 feet tall. A creature that vanished from the islands around 600 years ago, but the condition was the horror. It wasn't fossilized. It wasn't a clean skeleton in a museum case. It was mummified, leathery, real. It looked like the bird had just wandered into the cave weeks before, maybe yesterday. That immediacy collapsed centuries. Right in an instant, for those cavers kneeling there in the silent dark, the psychological impact was profound. They weren't looking at a reconstruction. They were touching a recent death, a death that happened half a millennium ago. This was a direct connection, a tactile connection to a lost world, a world of megafauna that roamed those islands until the Maori people arrived. Research suggests human hunting did it, along with habitat changes. It drove these magnificent birds to extinction with startling speed. The claw in their hands wasn't just a curiosity. It was evidence, tangible, undeniable evidence of an ecological ending. It evoked a quiet, somber awe, mixed with a deep, unsettling sense of recency. It made that ancient loss feel like a fresh wound. The fear it inspired wasn't supernatural, it was ecological. It was the shock of confronting a consequence. Here was a creature that thrived for millions of years, wiped out in a geological blink by the arrival of a new predator. Us. Holding that claw was like holding a relic from a crime scene. A crime no one alive committed, but whose legacy we all inherit. It forces a humbling reflection on the weight of human presence, on how quickly a giant can be made into a ghost. Leaving nothing behind but a claw in a cave, a perfect, preserved reminder of what was here before we came. That claw belonged to a world that vanished from the surface. But some people didn't just mourn what was gone. They left the surface behind. They started digging down, and they kept digging. In 1963, a man in Cappadocia, Turkey, was fixing up his house. He knocked through a wall in his basement. Behind it, he didn't hit more rock. He found a passage, a dark hallway going down, cut right into the soft volcanic stone. He followed it. It opened into a room, then another corridor, then a staircase that went even deeper. This wasn't a hidden cellar. It was a door to a buried city. During Kuyu, the first archaeologists to map it felt a deep disorientation. This wasn't a cave, it was architecture in reverse, a city carved downward, level after level, more than 200 feet deep. A whole world underground. They found rooms for maybe 20,000 people, stables for animals, communal kitchens, ceilings still black from old fires. Wine presses, oil presses, a whole system of ventilation shafts, some going all the way up to the surface for air, chapels, schools, all of it carved into the earth. The first feeling wasn't just awe, it was a creeping anxiety. Walking those silent, lamp-lit tunnels, you felt the weight of the world above you. The air was cool and still, smelling of ancient dust. The fear they talked about was claustrophobia, but also a kind of chilling empathy. They weren't just exploring ruins, they were walking through a monument to pure dread. Every carved step, every air shaft, every massive stone door built to seal the corridors from the inside, told one urgent story. This city wasn't built for trade or ritual. It was built for hiding. Its whole reason for being was to vanish, to let a whole community disappear from the earth for months at a time, safe from whatever was happening above. In those passages, you could feel the ghost of that decision, the deep fear that made people trade the sun and the sky for the safety of solid rock. Was it invaders? Persecution, some forgotten time of endless conflict. The stones don't say. They only echo the builder's urgency. A society that looked at the horizon and saw only threat, so they turned their genius inward, engineering a sanctuary in the dark. Derinkuyu is terrifying not because of what's there, but because of what it means. It's the final statement of a community's will to survive, no matter the cost. It makes you wonder what terror could be that great, that lasting, that the only sane choice was to erase your civilization from the landscape, to burrow into the heart of the earth and wait, listening in the dark for a peace that might never come. Derinkuyu was built to wait out a storm, but if the storm never ended, if the people waiting were the last of their kind, and the only record they left was a message no one can read. That's the silence of the Rongorongo Tablets, found on Easter Island in the 19th century. They're wooden boards, some shaped like paddles or staffs. Covered edge to edge in these tiny, intricate glyphs, birds, plants, human figures, geometric shapes, all carved with a sharp obsidian tool, in a flowing pattern where the lines turn back on themselves like an ox plowing a field. It's the only indigenous writing system ever found in Oceania. For the linguists and archaeologists who first held them, that initial wonder turned into a specific dread. This wasn't just an undeciphered script, it felt like a plea, a final plea from the edge of oblivion. Easter Island's story is one of profound change. Research suggests a society that, over centuries, saw its lush palm forests vanish, its soil depleted, its means of survival strained. The famous moai, the great stone heads, are monuments from an earlier, more prosperous time. By the time Europeans arrived, the culture was in deep hardship. The Rongorongo Tablets likely date from this later period, and that context chills the blood. These aren't royal decrees from a powerful king. They're perhaps the last testament of a people watching their world shrink. They could be histories, genealogies, sacred chants, or dire warnings to the future. We don't know. Every attempt to find a key has failed. The language of the glyphs died with the last scribe. There's no Rosetta Stone for Rongorongo. Linguists who have dedicated years to it speak of a unique frustration, mixed with a palpable sorrow, the sorrow of a conversation cut off forever. You hold the tablet, you trace the careful grooves with your finger, and you can feel the intelligence behind the marks, the urgency. Someone cared desperately about preserving this. They carved these symbols with purpose, believing they held meaning that must survive, and yet they are mute. The fear these tablets inspire isn't of a ghost. It's of a void. They are the ultimate symbol of total cultural memory loss. A library we can see, touch, photograph in high resolution, but it's a library where every book is locked and the key was thrown into the sea centuries ago. They are the last words of a civilization, etched in wood, screaming into a silence they knew was coming. They force us to confront a terrifying fragility. That an entire way of thought, a people's understanding of their gods, their ancestors, their own tragic history, can be reduced to beautiful, baffling patterns on a piece of driftwood. The tablets aren't just artifacts, they are a mirror. They ask us what of our own world, our own stories, might one day be just as beautifully and just as completely lost. The silence of lost languages is a library of unanswered questions, but sometimes the artifact isn't a message, it's a shape that seems to whisper a secret about the physics of our world. A secret its makers shouldn't have known. In 1898, in a tomb at Saqqara, Egypt, they found a small object, a wooden model, just a few inches long. From about 200 years before the Common Era, they catalogued it as a bird figurine, stored it away with other tomb goods. For decades, that's what it was. A stylized carving of a falcon, a common symbol, but in the 1960s, a researcher looked at it with fresh eyes, and he felt a chill of recognition. This was not just any bird. The proportions were odd. The wings were straight, not rounded, thick in the front, tapering to a thin, sharp edge, and they were set at a distinct angle. To an aeronautics engineer, that shape was instantly familiar, eerily familiar. It wasn't the wing of a bird, it was an airfoil, the exact cross-sectional shape that gives an airplane wing lift. The Saqqara Bird, they call it now, it even has a vertical tail fin, like the stabilizer on a modern aircraft. A bird's tail is horizontal. That detail was the final clue. The unsettling one, the idea it presents is a quiet thunderclap. Could ancient Egyptian artisans, just by watching birds, have intuitively carved a model that captured precise aerodynamic principles? Principles that wouldn't be formally understood until the Wright brothers. Did they, through trial and error, stumble onto the secret of gliding flight? With paper or reed models, maybe. For the experts who analyzed it, this possibility was exhilarating and deeply frightening. It wasn't about aliens. It wasn't about a lost super-civilization. It was about human curiosity. It suggested a flash of practical insight, a seed of technological inquiry that was never watered. Someone carved this shape with purpose. Was it a child's toy designed to be thrown? A ceremonial object meant to symbolize not just a bird, but the essence of flight? Or was it the physical record of a forgotten experiment? The fear it inspires is subtle. It's the fear of a door left unopened. The artifact is terrifying in its simplicity. And its potential, it hints at a parallel path in history, a branch of practical science that was glimpsed, maybe even played with, and then abandoned. The knowledge wasn't suppressed, it just wasn't pursued. It remained a curiosity in a tomb while civilization moved in other directions. This small piece of wood forces a humbling question. How many other seeds of understanding have we left buried in the sand, not because they were hidden, but because no one at the time saw the towering tree that could grow from them? The Saqqara Bird is a monument to a might-have-been. It makes the air around us feel different. For a moment, you can almost hear the whisper of a wind that could have carried ancient gliders. A whisper that faded away, leaving only this silent, perfect shape in the dark. The Saqqara Bird is a whisper, but in Laos there's no whisper, there's a question. Carved in stone, thousands of them, the Plain of Jars. It's a landscape, rolling hills, and it's littered with these enormous stone jars. They're not small. They're monumental, made from solid rock. Some stand nearly 10 feet tall. They weigh tons. They were put here over 2,000 years ago, during the Iron Age. And they're not in rows, they're scattered, like a giant hand just emptied a sack of them across the hills. For the archaeologist Madeleine Colony, who studied them in the 1930s, and for anyone who sees them, the first feeling isn't wonder. It's a deep awe, an unsettling one. The scale is overwhelming. You stand in a field of silent, hollow giants, and you know instinctively what they were for. Excavations confirmed it. Many jars held human remains, bone fragments, teeth, burial goods too, beads, iron tools. This was a landscape for the dead. A city built not for the living, but for the rituals of passing. That understanding changes the air. The quiet here isn't peaceful, it's heavy. It's the silence of a ceremony. The last participants vanished millennia ago. You walk among the jars and you feel like an intruder in a sacred space that has outlasted its makers. The labor is staggering. Each jar was carved from a single boulder with iron chisels and stone hammers. Then it was dragged somehow to its place. Why? Why make such permanent, immovable vessels for what is temporary? The theories are profound. Maybe the bodies were placed inside for a sky burial, exposed to the elements until only bones were left, then buried elsewhere. Or maybe the jars were the final resting places, marking graves for important individuals or families. The plain doesn't give up its secrets. It only offers its presence, its somber, immense presence. But in the 20th century, a new layer of dread was added. The region became a battleground. Unexploded bombs, cluster munitions, they littered the earth around the jars, even inside them. To walk there was to navigate an ancient mystery buried in a modern minefield. This combination is terrifying. It merges the solemn fear of a forgotten necropolis with the immediate, physical fear of the ground beneath your feet. It makes the plain a place of double silence, the silence of a lost ritual, and the silence that follows a more recent, devastating conflict. The jars stand through it all. Impassive, they've witnessed the cycle, our ceremonies for those we lose, and our capacity for destruction. They frighten not because they're haunted, but because they're mirrors. They reflect the monumental efforts we'll undertake to honor our dead, and they stand as stark reminders, stone reminders, of how those same sacred spaces can be caught centuries later in the crossfire of our struggles. They are a funeral enigma, written in the land itself. A question about mortality, carved in rock, waiting for an answer that may never come. A coin is a kingdom's story, metal and stamp, power declared right in your hand. But sometimes the coin tells a story the books don't know. 1957, a settlement site in Maine, Native American, an amateur archaeologist sifting soil. He found a small silver disc. He cleaned it, and the world tilted. It was a Norse penny, minted in Norway under King Olaf Kyrre, between 1067 and 1093. It was genuine. Experts verified it, and it was found in a layer dated to the 12th century, centuries before Columbus. For the archaeologists who studied it later, that first excitement turned. It became a kind of quiet dread, a historical vertigo. The coin was a solitary scream, a metallic one, in a record that's otherwise silent. The Norse settlements we know, like Elance Orks Meadows up in Newfoundland, they're far to the north. They were small, fleeting. The sagas mention voyages to a place called Vinland, but the details are thin. This coin, the Maine Penny, was found hundreds of miles south of there. In a context that says it wasn't dropped by a modern collector, it was there, among Native American artifacts, over 800 years ago. So how did it get there? That's what chilled them, the possibilities. Was it carried by a lone Norse explorer, a trader, a wanderer who went far beyond any mapped edge, into territories no saga ever wrote down? Or did it move hand to hand, through long trade networks, indigenous routes that spanned the continent, moving south from some Norse outpost until it finally rested in Maine? Either one is terrifying in what it implies. The coin is a tiny, perfect anomaly. It punches a clean hole right through the standard story, the story of a pre-Columbian America, isolated from the Old World. It suggests contact, fleeting, unrecorded contact, a meeting on a beach, an exchange, a moment of mutual curiosity that left no other trace, just this one stubborn piece of silver. That's the source of the fear. It's a data point you can't ignore, but you can't place it. It whispers of alternate histories, paths not taken, conversations between cultures that happened once, and then time swallowed them. The Maine Penny frightens because it's a ghost of a might-have-been. It reminds us starkly that history isn't just written by the victors, it's written by the survivors. The ones who stayed and built and kept records. It's not written by all the travelers, not by the lone sailor who turned back, not by the trader who came home with just a strange story. This coin is physical proof of a story that wasn't written down. A silent witness to an encounter that could have changed everything, but apparently didn't. Or did it? That question hangs there, as cold and heavy as the silver. It makes you wonder what other single pieces of evidence are buried, waiting to append the stories we tell about the past. A coin is a whisper, a single meeting history forgot, but sometimes a discovery isn't a whisper, it's a shout, and this shout, it can break the whole story we tell about ourselves. For a long time, the story was simple. It went in steps. First, people learned to farm. Agriculture meant extra food. That surplus let them stop moving. They built villages, then towns, and with that stability, with that leisure, they could finally build temples, develop complex religion. Civilization was a ladder. Farming was the first rung. You couldn't skip it. Then, in the 1990s, on a hill in southeastern Turkey, Göbekli Tepe archaeologists started digging. They hit limestone bedrock. And carved right out of that bedrock, they found pillars, huge T-shaped pillars, some over 16 feet tall, weighing more than 10 tons, arranged in great stone circles. And covered in carvings, deep, intricate reliefs of animals, snakes, foxes, scorpions, wild boars. The work was incredible, the scale was massive. Then they got the radiocarbon dates back. And the dates weren't just old, they were impossible, over 11,000 years old. That's the pre-pottery Neolithic. According to every textbook, that's when humans were hunter-gatherers. Small bands, nomads following herds, living in temporary camps. They didn't farm. They didn't have permanent settlements. They definitely didn't build monuments like this. When that date was confirmed, it sent a chill through the field. This wasn't just a new find. It was an anomaly, a stone that didn't fit. Göbekli Tepe was a contradiction. A brutal one. It contradicted the whole paradigm. The fear wasn't about ghosts. It was the fear that our story was wrong. The implications were terrifying for the old model. These pillars showed coordinated labor, hundreds of people working together over generations. That requires social hierarchy, planning, division of labor. All the signs of a complex society. but at the site there was no evidence of agriculture, no granaries, no sign of a large permanent village nearby. So Göbekli Tepe asked a question, a terrifying, beautiful question. What if we had it backwards? What if it wasn't farming that made religion possible? What if it was religion that made farming necessary? A theory started to form. Maybe these stone circles were a sacred site, a pilgrimage spot. Hunter-gatherer groups from across the region would gather here seasonally. For rituals to feed all those people coming together, the wild food wouldn't be enough, so they started to cultivate wild grasses, domesticate animals. Not to settle down, but to fuel their gatherings, to build their temple. In this light, agriculture wasn't the cause of civilization, it was the tool. A tool invented to serve a spiritual need. That inversion, that's what makes the site so unsettling. It feels like a message, a cathedral built not by a kingdom, but by a collective will. The builders themselves are lost, their language is gone. We can only look at the snarling beasts on the pillars and guess at the stories. It's a monument to a lost chapter of human ambition. It shows that long before cities, before writing, before empires, humans could unite for something beyond survival. They looked at a bare hill and saw a sanctuary. And they moved mountains to build it. Göbekli Tepe frightens you because it removes a certainty. It shows the dawn of civilization wasn't a slow, inevitable sunrise. It was a flash of collective genius lit by a shared belief in something unseen. And then, just as mysteriously, they buried their own masterpiece. Thousands of tons of earth, as if to save it for a future they knew would come, leaving us with the rubble of our old theories and the silent, towering question of why. A worker found it in 1872, digging near Lake Winnipesaukee. He pulled it from the earth, a polished egg of stone. It fit in the palm of his hand. But this wasn't a river stone. It was deliberate, carved from a rare, hard quartzite, smoothed to a glossy finish, almost machine-like, and on its surface a tapestry of symbols. A Sama human face, a teepee, an ear of corn, a circle with dots, and these precise, looping spirals. The symbols made no sense together. For the men who first saw it, it was an object of profound bafflement. A perfect riddle. The motif seemed Native American, but the craftsmanship was all wrong. The polish was too fine, the symmetry too exact. It felt like an artifact from a future that never arrived. Or a past we never knew that created a deep unease. The stone was an orphan. It didn't fit any known sequence for the region, too advanced for the timelines. Yet its symbols felt ancient. Who made it, and for what purpose? A ceremonial object, a treaty stone, a charm, or a message from a lost race, evidence of contact across oceans. The stone frightens not by being ominous, but by being impeccably silent. A beautiful, cold mystery. Every groove was carved with clear intent. Someone was speaking through this stone, using a symbolic vocabulary they believed would be understood, and that language is now lost. The communication has become noise. Holding it is like holding a locked diary. You feel the weight of the thought put into it. You see the care, but the story inside is sealed. It's a quiet monument to the fragility of meaning. An entire world you can be condensed into a single, beautiful object. And if that object outlives the culture, all that remains is the shape of the mystery. The stone doesn't whisper of catastrophe. It whispers of a conversation that ended. A message sent but never received, and in that silence there is a loneliness, deeply, quietly unsettling. The stone's polished silence is a message lost to time. We think we're past that now. We have satellites, sonar, the map is filled in, the deep places are known. Then in 2011, a Swedish team was scanning the Baltic Sea floor. Their side-scan sonar showed something, a perfect circular shadow, 60 meters across, just sitting there on the flat, muddy bottom. The return was clean. Sharp, it looked like a giant plate or a round hatch. Some would say it looked like the Millennium Falcon, half buried. They called it the Baltic Sea Anomaly. The first thought was scientific, a strange geological formation, but a dive team went down to film it, and the reports changed. They talked about a visceral fear. An operational fear. Their electrical equipment would malfunction near it, cameras died, satellite phones went silent, and the object itself, when they saw it through the murk, wasn't a smooth disk. It had what looked like stair steps along the side. The surface was rough like concrete, with strange, right-angled features, too geometric to feel natural. For the crew in that dark capsule, it was isolating. Here we are in the 21st century with the best technology, and we're facing something that defies explanation. The ocean floor is the last great wilderness, crushing pressure, perpetual night. To encounter an ambiguity there with your instruments flickering, it taps into something primal. The fear of the deep itself, the unknown that's still here on our own planet. The anomaly scared people, not because it was definitely alien or ancient. Geologists have strong explanations. It's likely a glacial erratic, a huge boulder left by a retreating ice age glacier. The steps could be natural fracturing. The shape, a coincidence of sonar interpretation. But that rational answer doesn't erase the initial chill. The power lies in that moment of discovery. In that blurry sonar image, it represents a crack in our modern certainty. We assume our tools show us truth, but sometimes they show us a riddle. And in the immense, silent black of the deep sea, a single riddle can grow into a legend. It reminds us that exploration, even now, isn't just about finding answers. It's about being humble enough to be frightened by a question you didn't expect to ask. The ocean floor keeps its secrets, and sometimes it shows us just enough to make us wonder what else is down there in the dark, waiting for a passing sonar beam to give it a shape. And a story, they're about the size of a walnut, found in South African mines inside rock layers that are 3 billion years old, the Klerksdorp Spheres. They look like curiosities, small spheres or sometimes disks, and they often have this fine, precise groove running right around the middle. They're made of the same stone they were found in, which is pyrophyllite. But it's their shape that makes you stop, that near-perfect roundness, those clean, symmetrical lines. They look manufactured. They feel that way. For a geologist, the first reaction is curiosity, professional interest, but then sometimes there's this other feeling, a kind of chill. The rock around them is from the Precambrian. That's a time before multicellular life. Before plants, long before anything that could use a tool. The earth was young, volatile, and in that ancient stone we find objects that look like they were made on a lathe. The standard explanation is a natural one. They could be concretions, mineral growths that formed in layers, creating spheres. The grooves could be from pressure over eons. A natural seam. They're geological marvels, not artifacts, but for the people who see design in them, the fear isn't about ghosts or the supernatural. It's a fear of scale, of deep time. If these little spheres aren't natural, if they show intention, then the whole timeline of intelligence on Earth. It breaks. It doesn't just go back a few more millennia. It goes back billions of years into that geological abyss. Imagine that, a technology or a consciousness that existed when the continents were still shaping themselves. A maker who left behind not pyramids, but these small, enigmatic marbles. They become messengers from an epoch so distant. Our entire history is just a blink in comparison. All of human civilization, with its wars and art and science, becomes a brief event. A recent footnote in a story whose earlier chapters are written in a language of stone we can't read. That's the real disquiet of these spheres. They force a humbling perspective. They're not scary because they threaten us. They're scary because they diminish us. They ask a quiet, monumental question. Are we the first to wonder about our place in the universe? Or are we just the latest in a cycle so long, its beginnings are lost in the planet's own bedrock? They sit in your hand, cool and heavy, not as proof of anything, but as a perfect, polished question mark, a reminder that the past isn't just what we've written down. It's also what the Earth itself has chosen to shape, for reasons we might never understand. They were found in Romania in a Neolithic grave, 1961. 3 small pieces of clay fired. You could hold them all in one hand, and on the surface there are symbols scratched in before the clay hardened. Over 7,000 years ago, rows of symbols organized a comb shape, angled lines, what looks like a horned animal. It feels deliberate, not random. And the date, they were dated to 5,300 before the Common Era. That's centuries older than Sumerian cuneiform from Mesopotamia, the place we call the cradle of writing. So if these markings are writing, then the story doesn't start where we thought. It starts here, in the Balkans. With a culture we know almost nothing about, the Vinča culture. That's where the fear comes from, an academic fear, a fear that lives in journals. It's a fear of the paradigm shattering. The tablets aren't supernatural. They're a threat to history itself, to the neat narrative we built. They whisper something, that a sophisticated society using symbols was here in southeastern Europe, long before the city-states of the Near East, and then it faded, for reasons we don't know, leaving these clay fragments behind, and advanced figurines. Metallurgy, the debate is fierce. Some see a proto-writing system, for ritual, maybe accounting. Others see just ownership marks, decoration, but their power isn't in consensus. It's in the possibility, the stubborn, silent possibility. They scare you because they're a door cracked open, just enough to see a sliver of light from a room you never knew was there. What if the Vinča weren't just farmers? What if they were grappling with abstraction, with the need to record things? What stories are in those scratches? What transactions, what prayers? To hold one would be to hold a potential first draft of human thought, a draft in a language whose key is lost, dust. It's a voice that was silenced, not by catastrophe, but maybe by the slow turn of centuries. Its innovations absorbed or forgotten. It forces a question. A humbling one. How many other cradles have we missed? How many other times did humanity stumble to the brink of writing, of complex record-keeping, only to step back, leaving a few clues in the dirt? The Tărtăria Tablets aren't loud, they're a whisper from a forgotten dawn, and sometimes the quietest whispers challenge the loudest stories. The stories we tell about ourselves. There's a carving on a temple wall in Dendera in Egypt, in the Temple of Hathor. It's from the late Ptolemaic period, right before the Common Era. The relief shows this strange scene, a large, bulbous object shaped like a pear or a teardrop standing upright. Inside it, there's a snake stretching the whole length of the chamber. A human figure is holding the snake, and from the base of this bulb, a kind of cable runs to a box, and on that box sits a baboon god. To a modern eye, the resemblance is immediate. It looks exactly like a giant light bulb. The snake is the filament, the bulb is the glass, the cable is the wire, the figure is an operator. When that idea reached the public, it started a firestorm. And it brought with it a specific kind of fear. The fear wasn't of the dark, it was a fear of a different illumination. What if this wasn't symbolic art? What if it was a technical diagram? The idea was electrifying, literally. It suggested the ancient Egyptians might have had electric light, that their deepest tombs were lit not by torches or smoky lamps, but by the steady glow of arc lamps. That notion was captivating and frightening, exciting because it promised to rewrite history, to put an ancient civilization centuries ahead, but frightening for a deeper reason. It represented the ultimate anxiety of getting it wrong. The fear that we, with our modern technology-filled minds, are doomed to project our own world onto the past. We see a bulb and a snake and a wire, so we build a story of lost electrical genius. We want the past to mirror our present, to validate our own path. The official explanation from Egyptology is quieter and richer in symbolic meaning. Scholars say the scene is a religious motif. The bulb is the womb of the sky goddess, or a lotus flower. The snake is the deity emerging, a symbol of creation, of divine power. The cable is an umbilical cord. The whole thing is a cosmological map, not an electrical schematic. It speaks of birth, of renewal, of the sun's eternal cycle. That clash is where the real mystery is, and the real chill. The Dendera relief frightens not because it might be a light bulb, but because it shows how we see. It shows the powerful lure of the literal. When we look at ancient symbols, we are often looking for ourselves. We search for our tools, our science. And in doing that, we risk missing the true message. The message is written in a language of metaphor, of myth, a worldview where the divine was as real as stone. Where a snake in a bulb wasn't a filament, but a god being born. The carving's power comes from this duality. It holds two competing truths. One is a tantalizing fiction of advanced technology. The other is a profound truth about ancient belief. One promises a past that was like us. The other reveals a past that was utterly, beautifully different. And in that difference, in the silent gap between a light bulb and a lotus flower, there's a humbling lesson. Sometimes the greatest mysteries aren't about what the ancients knew. They're about what we are desperate to believe they knew. That final carving, the Dendera light, it shows us something about how we see. We look for our own reflection in the past. And maybe that's the deepest fear. After these 25 discoveries, you see a single thread. The fear these explorers felt wasn't about ghosts, it wasn't about curses. It was about mirrors, every unsettling artifact, every silent city, every script we can't read. They all hold up a mirror to our own deepest anxieties. The terror of lost knowledge, the dread of a society collapsing, the vertigo of hitting the limit of what we can understand, and then the humbling realization. The unknown depths of what people could do, what they could believe. This explorer's fear isn't a childish superstition. It's rational. It's a deeply human response to a kind of cognitive dissonance, but on a historical scale. Each one of these finds is a puncture, a clean, sudden puncture in the comfortable story. The linear story of human progress. They reveal the gaps, the long silences, the other paths people saw and then walked away from. The Antikythera Mechanism isn't just a complex clock. It's a ghost of a golden age of science we never knew was there, and it whispers about the fragility of genius. The buried city of Derinkuyu isn't just an engineering marvel. It's a monument to a fear so great, so enduring, that the only sane response was to erase a whole community, to take them off the surface of the earth. But this fear isn't a dead end. It's one of archaeology's most valuable tools. That initial chill, that sense of disquiet, it's a catalyst. It drives the inquiry forward. It gives you unnecessary humility, a deep respect for the staggering complexity of the human journey. It reminds you the past isn't a dead country. It isn't safely mapped and filed away. It's a living puzzle. A puzzle whose pieces can still shift under your hands and unsettle the certainties of your present. These 25 mysteries teach you that history isn't a single story. It's a chorus of whispers. Some voices are clear, others are just out of reach, speaking in languages we've forgotten. The true task isn't to force them into our narrative. It's to listen, to sit with the discomfort of not knowing, to let that respectful fear guide you toward deeper questions and toward a more profound awe. For the strange, brilliant, endlessly mysterious journey of humankind, screaming mummies, impossible maps, 25 finds, they have something in common. They show archaeology's greatest treasures aren't the ones that confirm what we already know. Often, they're the ones that frighten us, that push us toward new ways of thinking. These objects, these sites, they're more than relics, they're direct challenges, an invitation to question our deepest assumptions, to wonder about roads not taken, to acknowledge the unknowns that still surround our history. They force us to sit with the discomfort of not having all the answers, and in that space, real discovery can begin. So as we finish this list of mysteries, it's worth pausing on that feeling. The chill each explorer felt, that wasn't failure, it was contact, a signal they'd brushed against the true texture of the past. A past that refuses to be a simple, linear story. Every scared explorer, the diver holding a corroded gear, the caver staring at a giant claw, they contributed something. They added a piece, however unsettling, to the mosaic of our past. Their fear was the price of admission to a deeper truth. Let this whole journey be a reminder. History isn't just a collection of facts we've filed away. It's equally defined by the mysteries we haven't solved, the silent scripts, the purposeless spheres. The cities built for hiding, they aren't flaws in the record, they are the record. They're what keep the story alive, dynamic, endlessly fascinating. They keep us searching, digging, looking at the world with wonder. If these stories of discovery and dread have held you, there's always more. You can subscribe to keep going into history's hidden corners, and we'd like to hear from you. Which of these 25 finds unsettled you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. The conversation about our mysterious past, it never really ends, and your perspective is a part of it.